When you were first learning English, how many people have told you that in order to sound like a native speaker, you need to live abroad, at least for a certain period of time? However, I would consider myself a living proof of the fact that no, you do not need to live abroad or spend a lot of money on summer school or expensive language training to sound like a native speaker. In fact, I learned to speak with an American accent way before I had ever been to the US. So in this video, I wanted to share how you can learn to speak with an American accent. We're gonna get into the rhythm, intonation, and pronunciation of the American accent, as well as all the tips and tricks and all the little things that you can do at home to practice the American accent for free and completely by yourself. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Hi there, my name is Indra. I'm originally from Germany, and about 2 years ago, I moved to the US, where I now live with my American husband, Chandler. First, let's reframe this idea a little bit of what an accent actually is. I think it's very easy and very normal to think of it as just physical speech patterns. It's just how you pronounce certain words. I personally think an accent is actually a lot more than just the pronunciation of certain words and certain sounds. And I really look at it a lot more as a social pattern. An accent reflects so many things like geography and culture and migration and history and identity. It's really so much bigger than just how to pronounce certain words. We are immersing ourselves into the American culture and we're absorbing culture, and therefore we're shaping our pronunciation. Because when I grew up in Germany, ever since I can remember, have been really obsessed with American pop culture, American TV shows, American movies and American movie stars, and American talk shows, that I absorbed also so much of that culture, and ultimately that shaped how I spoke English. So I really want you to think about parts of American culture, whether that's history or sports or books or movies or whatever it is that you are interested in and that you want to kind of immerse yourself in as you learn the American accent. The other thing that's important to mention, I think, is that there is no such thing as the American accent. So there is a ton of regional accents in the US. But when we talk about learning American English, we often refer to general American English, which is the American English and the American accent that is used for language learning purposes. So general American English and that general American accent is usually what you'll hear a lot on TV, especially news anchors or like talk show hosts. They usually talk very similarly.
We'll take a look back at some of the amazing stories we've covered.
So when I say the American accent, I'm referring to the general American English accent. Let's move on and talk about some of the most important speech characteristics of American English that are very important to keep in mind when we're learning an American accent. The first thing to know about the rhythm of American English is that it is naturally stress timed. So Americans will stretch out the words that are important, so the stressed words or stressed syllables, and they will compress the syllables in the words that are less important to the meaning of the sentence. An example of that is the sentence, I want to go to the store. I might have exaggerated it a little bit, but I think it becomes very clear that the most important parts of that sentence are want, go, and store. I want to go to the store. You want to think about it more as like an accordion that stretches out and compresses and then stretches out again and compresses again, meaning that you don't actually want to speak too evenly in American English. You really want to have some fluctuation in there. The other very important characteristic is that in American English, it's very typical and very common that you reduce sounds and that you join them together. So instead of saying, I'm going to go to the store, you can just say, I'm going to go to the store. Instead of saying, I want to go to the store, you can just say, I want to go to the store. And you're really maintaining that flow and that accordion rhythm instead of saying, I'm going to go to the store, which is a lot more this staccato way of speaking. And we really want to have this stretchy, flowy sound to it. And so I think at this point, it's probably not a surprise that American English has a lot more vocal variation. That means American English just has a lot of pitch changes. So your pitch rises and falls more naturally as you're speaking, which can be very counterintuitive, especially to German native speakers or French native speakers, because I think those are both languages that are quite structured in their pronunciation. But in American English, I have the freedom to be like, oh my God, that is so crazy. What do you mean? I really enjoy that you have this flexibility of showing how you feel by how you pronounce and like how you use the accordion to stretch out certain words. Those are important to keep in mind for the rhythm, the flow, and also the intonation of American English. You're allowed to vocally highlight what's important, and you're also allowed to compress and just dial back what's not important. You're allowed to just play with your pitch and be expressive and a little bit more dramatic and react with your pronunciation to things.
I love that.
Now let's get into some of the most important sounds that you need to know in order to speak with an American accent. I think if I only got to pick one sound to kind of describe the American accent, it would be this one, the American R, because it's so distinctly American and it is used so frequently that it is just like one of the most important sounds to know for the American accent. So physically, how you pronounce the American R is you want to pull back your tongue a little bit, and while the tip of your tongue does not touch the roof of your mouth, you almost want it to. You're pulling it back, you're lifting the tip of your tongue, and then your lips are a little bit rounded, and the sound that you're producing comes from that tension and retraction of the tongue. Really, it's like you can almost pull it back and then shoot it forward a little bit. Forward. Really. And you'll notice that in order to speak authentically with an American accent, you're gonna have to like use your mouth a lot more, even just in terms of like opening and closing it. For a lot of other languages, German included, you do not need to move your lips and your mouth as much, and you do not need to open and close it as dramatically. But for American English, that's quite stretched and very expressive. You really want to get used to like opening your mouth more. Forward, water. So you really can't be scared of using your mouth if you want to speak with an American accent. And the reason why I want to really practice the American R is because that is a rhotic R, not an erotic R, but like a rhotic R, which means that the R is pronounced in all positions, especially also at the end of a word. So if you have a German accent, you're probably more inclined to say something like water, but knowing that the R in American English is always pronounced in every position. Water. The second most important sound to know in American English is the alveolar flap. And it sounds really fancy, but what it really just means is that if you encounter a T or a double T that appears between two vowels and the second vowel is unstressed, you will pronounce the T or double T as a soft D. So there are a few examples of that. Water, right? You pronounce the A very clearly in front of the T, but then you swallow the E. Water. It's almost like it goes straight from a T to the R, water. Another example of that is better. The first E is stressed, the second one is unstressed, so the double T turns into a D, better. On the other hand though, if the second vowel or the second sound after the T is also stressed, then you keep pronouncing the T as a regular T. An example of that would be attack, because both A's are stressed, attack. Those two sounds, the American R and the alveolar flap, also really show how, once again, American English is all about prioritizing and maintaining just a very good flow of speech and a very wavy rhythm rather than focusing on the accuracy of pronunciation. I think to say water has like this very natural flow to it, while in British English, water is more like this sharp rise and this sharp drop. One more specific sound I do want to touch on just to really round out this picture of how American English works and how the American accent works is the American A. Examples of that are words like can't, man, answer. That's a sound that Americans usually pronounce more nasally and also more open and more flat at the same time compared to British English or also a lot of European languages. I mean, in German, you just pronounce it ah. In American, ah becomes an A, which is more nasal. A lot of vowels in American English are pretty stretched, so they become a lot wider, but they also become flatter, if that makes sense. If I think about the British can't, I think of it as quite like a round, deep sound. Well, when I say can't, it is super flat, but it is also stretched out. It's really just like a piece of gum and you're taking it and stretching it out. So that part, I hope I was able to highlight some of the actual properties of the American accent and how it works and some of the things to be aware of when you're learning an American accent. Now let's get into some of the things you can actually do at home, no matter where you live, to also train and learn and practice the American accent. Because growing up and living in Germany and not ever really leaving Europe the first 18 years of my life, the way I learned the American accent was, I was watching a ton of American TV shows, a ton of American movies, and I was surfing the internet. I was on YouTube. And because Germans dub a lot of the American TV shows, at first I'd watch them in German, and then over time I got so bored and I figured out that you can switch the language to English, and I was really intrigued. Ooh, what do these characters actually sound like? So without really knowing it, I kind of built this world where so many touch points in my day-to-day life were built around being exposed to the American accent. And I can't stress enough how I genuinely think the constant exposure to the accent you're trying to learn is one of the best things you can do. And because I think accent is so closely tied to culture, it really helps to have a cultural interest in the accent you're trying to learn. So if there is an American sport that you're really interested in, or, certain American movies or American TV shows, I would really suggest trying to squeeze in as much exposure to that topic as you can in your daily life. So let's say, you're driving to work. How about we listen to an American podcast about a topic that we're really interested in? On our drive back from work, we continue that podcast or we listen to a different episode. That night, we're cooking dinner and we're watching an episode of our favorite American show. That should be your bottom line, should be exposing yourself to the American accent every single day. That is especially so important to understand the rhythm and the flow of speech in American English. Now, I think for a lot of people exposing themselves to American English, that isn't necessarily the issue, right? You have access to the internet, you usually have a few streaming services, but then practicing the American accent out loud is usually, I think, more intimidating, especially because there is this notion of, you really need to have someone to practice your speech with. If I had waited for someone to practice American English with me, I don't think I would talk like this. I think I would still be talking like this. It was a very strong German accent because I never actually practiced the pronunciation because I didn't have anyone to practice with. So no, the good news is that you don't need anyone to practice with. Why? Well, because remember how you're already constantly exposing yourself to American English. Well, the next logical step is you're just going to imitate what you hear.
Okay.
You're going to start imitating sentences, phrases from shows, from interviews, from movies out loud. Let me give you a breakdown of what I mean by that. When I was watching all of these American TV shows and American movies and it sounded really cool, I started naturally just mouthing along to what the characters were saying. So let's use The Devil Wears Prada as an example. The Devil Wears Prada obviously has a really iconic character, Miranda Priestley. I would start imitating things that she was saying, like her typical, "That's all.
That's all."
Here is why I think that imitation and impersonation is the secret weapon to mastering an American accent, or any accent for that matter. When you're impersonating someone, you're naturally being more dramatic than you would be when it's just you talking. Because when I'm impersonating a character, I'm paying really close attention to their tone of voice, I'm paying really close attention to their flow of speech, and I'm trying to impersonate all of that. So I'm not just focusing on one sound. I'm not just focused on the American R, or on the alveolar flap, or on the American A. I'm really just focused on the whole package of how it sounds. And the good thing is, you have the perfect example of the pronunciation right there on screen, so you don't need to guess if you're saying it correctly or not.
Groundbreaking.
So then the next level is you're not just going to imitate as you're watching or listening to something, but you're also going to start repeating those phrases throughout the day. And again, I think repeating iconic phrases from characters really helps because, first of all, they're usually pretty easy to memorize. And second of all, again, you're really training your mouth, and because you're being intentionally exaggerant and intentionally dramatic in your pronunciation. So you're really getting used to those different mouth movements that are required for American English, specifically like the R and the alveolar flap and the A, without trying to focus too hard on an individual sound. So now you're also repeating phrases throughout the day. So you're building muscle memory, you're practicing the sounds. As a next step, I do think it's important to establish some kind of feedback loop for yourself. And the way I would do that is to record yourself while you're speaking. And that didn't really dawn on me until I started making YouTube videos and constantly watching myself back. But that way you'll have such a tangible comparison. It could be as simple as every day I'm just going to record myself saying the same 5 to 10 sentences, and that takes me a few minutes, sending a voice note to yourself. And then the great thing is, especially if you're using phrases from a movie that you're repeating, so you can kind of go back and forth between how the person's saying it and how you're saying it, and really develop a good understanding for, oh, this already sounds a lot like how the person's saying it, and like, oh, this sound I might have to practice a little bit more individually. And that is most likely going to depend on your native language and which sounds come more naturally to you based on the pronunciation of your native language versus American English. I really find it hard to give a timeline of how long it takes to practice an accent. I think also some people might have a more natural tendency to be able to pick up an accent and to just move their mouth differently and be very flexible in that regard, and it might be harder for others to try and adjust their pronunciation. All right, that brings me to the end of the video. I really hope I was able to give you a good understanding of how the American accent works and how American English works and what to pay attention to when you're practicing the American accent, and also give you a little bit of a roadmap of how to actually practice the American accent in your daily life. That was the goal of this video, so let me know if I was successful or not, and also let me know if you have any questions or feedback. I would really appreciate that. I really believe that you can learn an excellent American accent no matter where you live, and you do not need to spend money doing that. You can if you want to, but you absolutely do not have to. So I just really want to emphasize that learning really good English and speaking almost like a native speaker is absolutely possible. You just need to commit to it. But you can do that entirely by yourself wherever you live and without having to spend a lot of money. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel.
Smash.
I'm gonna see you again very soon in my next video. Bye.